So your burgeoning new voice first feature is actually headed to Rotterdam via your producer. That's really encouraging. So that means that you're in forward momentum. I was wondering if you could describe to me the industry, how you relate to it, seeing that you're a new artist. What's that industry like for you?
Well, I think currently you have some very interesting African voices, whether here or the diaspora, that are emerging and that are speaking to people trying to articulate a new visual vernacular. And for me, looking at those kinds of films, like an Atlantique, for example, it makes me feel assured that I can try pursue my own singularity cinematically as well, right? I can exist within the space of the African cinematic landscape, but still be my own voice. And I think that's an exciting time to be an artist or a filmmaker on the continent. I think locally, as far as South Africa is concerned, it's kind of the same thing as well. It's trying to find what am I trying to say and how can I articulate it in the way that's true to me, as opposed to maybe looking at appeasing some sort of formula to making a film. And I think that's the encouragement of being in this lab is provided, is to trust this thing. That low voice, you must trust it.
Reading, catching up on your bio, I read that you also work in photography. You actually did an exhibition, fairly recent. I was wondering what kind of photography speaks to you. What would I have seen at the exhibit? Is it about landscapes? Is it about people? Is it about? Is it politicized? What kind of photography are you into?
Interestingly enough, it's trying to find my own understanding of myself and looking at other people. It's the weird thing I do where I imbue parts of myself on passing subjects. What I mean is that in this crazy chaotic space, I'm trying to identify these really lonely subjects that are walking past, right? And this idea of humanity at odds with the environment. Joburg can be quite isolating. It's a major city, so you find a lot of people who come into the city and, there's this blankness about them that I see, that I kind of, I document. But it's also a reflection of myself and my complicated interaction with the space. And people have interior spaces, things that I'll never have insight to, but I wonder what is going on with that person that's walking past. Or even if it's just the car that's sitting there, the suggestion of a life. And so that's what I'm kind of pursuing or trying to articulate photographically.
Something like your photography work would have informed you or gave you perhaps a better understanding of who those characters were?
I mean, I think thematically, not necessarily visually. This idea of isolation and being isolated, I only realized after the exhibition that there is actually a thread, or there's a commonality, and these things are kind of spiritual cousins between the script and the photography. And even the way I kind of frame things, kind of rigid, like tableaus almost. There's an isolating aesthetic to it. And I do think in the script there is elements of that, because it is a story about Johannesburg. It is my own interpretation of a city, and therefore it's these young black men who are, they're blowing in the wind almost. And there's something isolating about that experience that I'm trying to figure out.
Let's talk about the matriarch. She has a very peculiar presence in this film, and I don't want to necessarily dive into that, but I was wondering what her importance was when the sibling brothers were perhaps in a better place or a better dynamic, or were much closer. What was her role? What was that character's role, if any?
Part of her as a character when she was alive. This idea that we inherit the previous generation's sins and trauma. Even when she was alive, she had a lot of mental health issues. Feeling that by ending her own life, she might maybe help her kids stop suffering, because her being there in and of itself is making them suffer. That's obviously her subjective
Wow.
thinking. Yet and still, her being out of their life while they're growing up, there's all this pain, there's all this trauma, and that word is thrown around loosely lately. But you know, there's a lot that people cocoon in, right? And her coming back serves as a sort of as a mirror into these men's state of mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just physicalizing this pain, and using the spirit that's, you know, this dreamlike essence. She maybe, you know, she exists on many different dimensions to really talk about something more emotional and universal. That this idea that our pain builds up, you know, from childhood. The things that we don't engage with.
It's rather interesting that she sort of like takes herself out, makes that conscious choice to take herself out of the equation.
Right.
That's a really wow. That's a really bold
Right.
point to that character.
Yeah, I mean, it's an amalgamation of different people.
Okay.
Interesting experiences that I've come across, people I know, people I've heard of, and that kind of thinking as well. Which, as well, to me, when I thought about that, or when I spoke to people about, I'm like, wow, okay, that's an interesting way to look at how you can end someone's pain and suffering, right?
Mm-hmm. What are some visual ideas that you might have had, not belonging to cinema?
Me having been born and raised in Joburg for so long and seeing so many elements that I'd like to subvert. You know what I mean? For example, I don't know if you know this, but Joburg was originally like a mining town. So you have these mining heaps at the edge of town in Soweto Township, right? It's all this, it's almost like limestone, right?
Yeah.
But they heap up to become like this de facto mountain. And people in townships live under the shadow of this thing, right? And so even me looking at something like that and basing my story at a place like that, it's using that to speak about people who are living under forces bigger than them, all right? So it's little things in the everyday that I create meaning to, that, you know, gave me the courage
I hear you.
to look at Joburg in an interesting way that maybe people may not have experienced.
So everyday life informed you on
Yeah, I mean, and kind of freaking it for my own use. But it was really about, you know, even you look at the architecture, apartheid architecture, this kind of brutalist aesthetic. You know, it's got a very Soviet feel to it. Even that, and as you're looking at a city like Johannesburg, like, how have we never really mined this thing? It's so interesting. It can really be an interesting visual vernacular that the world has never seen about Johannesburg, right? And so I didn't lean too much into cinema so much as all these new elements that I'm seeing in a different way that I can use, you know? Yeah.
We'll leave off on the lab experience. I usually ask very precise questions, but this year I came up with the idea is like, when you're spacing out, when you're looking at your environment, I was wondering if there's one poster or one mentor's look aesthetic. Was there something that sort of like, in 20 years from now, you'll remember one, like, I don't know, the bunk bed that you're sleeping on. Like, what's one
that crystallizes the experience?
Yeah, what's one visual element that sort of harkens back to the lab? I mean, I know it's still fresh, but
no, I know. I was thinking about this the other day. It's a weird little thing when you're talking to the advisors, and they just sit up like this. You know, it's like, wow, this person's really invested in what I'm trying to say.
Yeah,
they really care. You know,
so
what I mean?
like a physical.
Yeah, it's just this physical thing where they just sit closer, like, oh, tell me more. It's like, oh, what are you saying? It's like, oh, no, you're talking shit. You know, it's all these little things, but the point of it is that they're here with you. They're present.
Yeah,
you know, they really they engage.
Yeah,
and I think those small things are special to me. I think there's something else. We're sitting around the circle, the advisors, the programmers, the fellows.
Yeah.
It was like, I don't know, 50 people in a small room, and I looked around. I'm like, okay, this is really happening. You know, I mean, it's the beginning of a journey. But even there, it's you know what the lab is for me. It's them identifying interesting voices and them saying, we want to help you make this thing. We want to support you, and they mean that.
Yeah.
In so many ways.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
They're wonderful people. The lab is intense. That's something, you know, I don't want to romanticize. It's really intense. I've been making this joke. It's like extreme sports out there.
I can imagine. There's the bullshit meter is right there.
Oh no, the threshold is very thin. You know, you're engaging with someone you've never met, you've never heard of, and they're reacting off of the text.
Yeah.
Right. And then someone like, nah, you bullshitting me.
It's a very vulnerable moment, I imagine.
Oh yeah, we're very emotional at the end. A lot of teary people, myself included.
That's great. A true cathartic experience.
Yeah. You know.
Well, thank you very much for your time, and have a great Sundance.
I appreciate that.
Looking forward to seeing where you land with this project or maybe other projects.
Right.
Hey, this is Eric from IONCINEMA.com. If you want to support us, subscribe below. For more reviews, interviews, film festival coverage from Sundance, Cannes, Toronto, you want to check out these guys on this side.